Hey folks! This week's episode is dedicated to a title I actually kickstarted a few years back now. Time's weird, and I don't like it. In any case, I'll be talking about Cradle Games' Hellpoint, a Soulslike in space. Notably, I did tackle this game alongside my buddy Alzarath, so my experience with it is split between segments I did on my own as well as the vast chunks I did with him. Still, that does beg the question, was I ultimately a fan of this sci-fi flavored take on the Soul genre, or was this title I would have preferred to avoid? I'm your host Arlyeon. Let's find out together. Welcome to Irid Novo, a space station that represents the union between humanity and the interstellar Arisen. It is here, far from the struggles of Earth, that the very forefront of science is pushed to its limits to see if we could create the soul within the crucible of technology. Yet things have gone amiss, as political factions maneuvered against each other, as tensions flared, and the hubris and heresy that served at Irid Novo's foundation reached critical mass. A trio of otherworldly gods emerged. It is in the wake of this calamity that you are called forth, a 3D printed emissary for the mysterious author, tasked with gathering information so that they can salvage what they can in a desperate bid to execute Irid Novo's glorious purpose. Though whether you choose to mindlessly serve or pursue an agenda all your own is something else entirely. That said, this introductory spiel might have been a bit more forthcoming than the game itself. Sure, the broad strokes of this are touched on in the opening scene and your initial interactions with the author, but beyond that, it's up to you to diligently search out the finer points. And it will take diligence, given that the game is rather fond of squirreling away messages in out-of-the-way or secret locations. That's not to say all your reading will be hard to come by. There's certainly countless item descriptions for you to poke at, data pads to pore over, and even a massive-ass library. Hell, you even get the opportunity to wander through a bleak abyssal void in order to talk with the very gods infesting Irid Novo, which enables you to do unhallowed tasks for them and essentially join their cult. And yet, as much as I tried to tackle the game in a thorough manner, I still found myself missing out on chunks of story. Specifically, I completely bypassed a chunk of the Architect's quest line and every bit of story associated with it. And there was nothing to hint that this would occur. My buddy Alzarath simply let me know that I'd somehow skipped it after the fact by progressing through the game. Thankfully, this hiccup didn't actually lock me out from finishing his story, which was a huge relief given it's tied to getting the game's best ending, but it didn't sit right with me. Still, I pressed on, I was enjoying the journey, and I still felt that I'd had a pretty good understanding of what was going on by the time I rolled up to the end. And that's about the point where the disappointment really set in. There's just something off-putting about how brusquely the true ending feels. Really, the only thing that stops it from being an "a winner is you" moment was the post-credits chunk of dialogue you get, and even that was sparse. I was just left wondering if perhaps the other endings contained more substance or pieces of the puzzle. So yeah, that's a thing, unfortunately. Still, as much as I can putter about talking about the merits of the journey versus the destination, I've got more to do than just wax lyrical about story bits. After all, we have some Souls-like gameplay to go over, and Hellpoint does change things up a bit. That said, before we go too deep into the minutiae, I may as well start with the basics. Essentially, once you've been Xeroxed into existence, you're given a task: to collect data. Now, this is done by reading lore, killing monsters, completing certain goals, and deicide. Deicide is really the big one here. Your ultimate goal is to accumulate at least 100% data, though you can push it to at least 150%, which is a mostly moot point unless you decide to do a certain side quest. It lets you undo deicide. Now, while your goal may be apparent, the execution is nowhere near as straightforward. I mean, it's a decrepit demon-possessed space station. Why would it be? It's not even all that long into the game before you're given some branching paths to explore, including access to an endgame area if you spelunked about and found a secret in the first area. Irid Novo is just large, and there's so much to do. much of which is optional, and absolutely all of which is replete with murder and death. Though, if I'm being honest, the main culprit was apt to be gravity. See, Hellpoint is a Souls-like with platforming, and my word do I have mixed feelings on it. There's just whole sections devoted to precision platforming, where a single mistake ends with you falling to your demise. It's just... There are some legitimately interesting segments amongst these, but the sheer time investment can feel incredibly daunting, in part because it can be difficult to properly gauge the right distance for a jump. That and the somewhat inconsistent chunks of fall damage you can take. And then, factor in the fact that you're frequently denied shortcuts through these lethal treks. Heck, one of the times I did unlock a shortcut on the end, only to die and discover the shortcut closed after my death. It was the worst. It was the worst because that shortcut popped up way near the end, and I died on the other side of that fucking shortcut because I was trying to revive my buddy, and just... Not that I hate jumping, by the way. There is consolation to be found from platforming your ways into places you shouldn't in order to get items before you're supposed to, but even then, I found myself fonder of its combat applications, so less leaping out of the way and more dropping pillar first into an enemy's skull, even if the recovery time sucked. Hubris, by the way, since gravity is far from the only threat. See, while your initial introduction to Hellpoint's enemies is fairly gentle, it's not too long before it begins unveiling subtle ambushes meant to wear you down, enemies poised to panic you into rolling off cliffs, or worse, powerful knights pretending to be statues only to one-shot you if they're not just roaming the halls of the starting area like they own the place. The fucking bastards. Hellpoint is just legitimately vicious. What's more, you can't always trust your memory, as certain elements of the enemy layout may change between games, between deaths. Maybe that statue actually is a statue this time, and it's the twin that is the enemy this time. Maybe an enemy has relocated, waiting to shank you as you turn the corner. It's honestly a bit unnerving for the random factor, and made worse by the way the world repopulates over time. Perhaps the biggest surprise, however, was the way the world changed as I overcame Hellpoint's bosses. And I'm not talking about the lesser ones you encounter. They bear little impact on the whole, beyond serving as a showcase for their lesser variants which populate the station as you proceed in the game. They are literally just bigger versions of normal enemies. No, specifically, I'm talking about the three deities haunting Irid Novo. In and of themselves, these encounters stood out not only by being more powerful than their peers, but also bearing a more varied assortment of attacks to throw your way, and having some legitimately cool designs. And also the fact that you can talk to them, fucking neat. Joining their cults, doing their little quests, great. But it was their death that made the most meaningful impact on the game, as I would suddenly find that their emissaries were no longer roaming the halls, instead replaced by worse things from their rivals. Suddenly, I found myself being plagued by incredibly powerful demons in locations I once felt confident about wandering through, which not only served as an interesting mechanical decision for which deity I wanted to kill next, it also felt very much like a meaningful integration of story and gameplay. What this boils down to is that I got very familiar with dying. And that age-old trope of bleeding your EXP onto the floor is in full play here, only just a little bit worse. See, Hellpoint ups the overall dread factor by also spawning a quantum ghost of you when you die. This is essentially a malign doppelganger using your loadout and stat build, which, just absolutely compounds whatever shitshow killed you in the first place. Really, the biggest silver lining about these guys, other than the fact that your cult partners don't spawn them, they give you chunks of EXP and provide you charges for your healing item, which, right, healing. So, this is also something that Hellpoint does quite differently from a number of other Souls-likes. While you are given a powerful healing item that fully heals you early on, it's far from the only one you have available. There's a fair number of variants to discover, with effects ranging from heals over time, curing certain obnoxious status ailments, and even some geared towards healing yourself and your co-op partner. Which is nice, given that while you can resurrect your buddy, it takes a large chunk of your health, large enough in fact that you can die from doing it, so it's good if he has the co-op one equipped. Unfortunately, the items needed to upgrade your max uses are fairly limited, and the odds are you've already likely invested a number in your starting item before finding any others. Which, yeah, I'll admit, I wasn't actually all that keen on dabbling. I mean, I could have, since you don't actually start at full once you get past 2 charges. That, and the simple fact that you build up charges. Notably, Hellpoint rewards players for surviving by allowing them to replenish spent healing items through violence, allowing longer treks and making even low-capacity heals viable. Plus, if you need charges, you can just beat up your Quantum Ghost since it provides that large boost. Alternatively, let your buddy die. When he dies, he'll have 2 charges, which are, yeah, again, hopefully the healing kind. Alzarath, hint, hint, hint. That's not the only violence-related resource either. There's energy, which fuels spells and guns, and also charges up by smacking people. You can legitimately run a Space Wizard and never really have to worry about running out of fuel if you mix in the occasional tap to someone's face. Magic is also heretical cancer since you can legitimately cast spells while blocking. It's just ridiculous and destroys some of the bosses once you get a good shield. More so once you factor in leveling. And I don't just mean stats. I mean, yes, stats help, but there's a few other systems you can navigate. For one thing, there are items you can attach to your weapons which essentially serve as an upgradable core. What's disgusting about this is how they scale. While they are costly, they don't hit soft caps like your stats do. Instead, they continue to grow increasingly powerful the more points you put into them, and it also changes things like the efficacy of the weapon they're slotted into, especially noticeable for casting items since they'll make the fireballs go faster, further, and cost less. And you can hypothetically push these things into the hundreds if you keep investing all of your experience into them. Also, slotting one of these items into your weapon enables it to gain experience, unlocking both passive and active abilities for that weapon. Just good luck on figuring out the finer points of what you've unlocked or in the process of unlocking, at least without a wiki, because that information isn't easily accessible on a weapon. Anyways, there's a reason I wound up diving down into that rabbit hole, and partly it was just I had a lot of time on my hands while playing this game for a myriad of factors. The first of which relates to that dial up at the top of the screen. Yeah, that thing friggin' moving just very slowly. Don't worry, I won't be screwing with it. I can't. It does what it wants and moves in real time, and this is important because you know those markings on it? Those denote times when certain things are going down. The markings opposite each other, for instance, denote when the station drifts into an accretion storm, an event that not only causes stronger things to spawn, it empowers everything in general and influences their drop rates to a degree. It also is associated with a select few optional horde encounters that can be cleared in order to get rewards, provided you come across these locations while the storm is active, and then clear them before it ends. This isn't so bad, honestly, at least not compared to the black hole doors. These fucking things. Okay, so they only open when the black hole portion of the dial lights up, that singular thing. So you have a very limited opportunity to get to these locations, including surviving any BS pertaining in getting there and finding the secrets they're sometimes stashed in, and then surviving any bullshit that might be inside. But that's not the only complication, because for a number of them, they're inaccessible anyways, unless you've been collecting codes from the wall. So even then, that'd require you to figure out which of these codes is associated with which black hole door, then to wait there at that black hole door so that the stars properly align. And I just hated this. I honestly hated waiting on these things so much. So I stopped. I just stopped. I had better things to do. And by better, I mean I decided to engage in another system, namely the daring effigies. And oh my god, I wasn't prepared. Essentially, they're like bonfire ascetics in Dark Souls 2, only instead of boosting enemies adjacent to a dimensional breach, your bonfire, it just pushes you into a higher New Game Plus mode. That's right, by the time I was at the second boss, I was already in New Game Plus difficulty, and it was rough. While I could damage normal enemies, the overall output of all the enemies had scaled hard, especially in the case of the boss that just outright melted me within seconds, which led to a few off-camera training montages. I also didn't learn my damn lesson. As you can see through a bunch of the footage for the bosses, I kept burning the things and diving deeper into New Game Plus out of stupidity, curiosity, stubbornness, and a greed for experience. And also, I guess, general masochism. This ultimately culminated in me getting into a fight with a deity, only for it to obliterate me instantly by drop-kicking me. Though, I guess I deserved it, given not moments before I touched a monolith, yeeted myself into an alternate version of the station, an infinitely darker one, and made a pact with said boss, but I mean, he didn't have to take it so hard. He was like the god of treachery. You'd think he would understand. We killed him, though. That's what counts. We killed him, and that left us a few things to do. Crafting was among them. It's a thing that you'll be doing throughout the game. It offers you a means of disintegrating all of the various drops that are going to clutter up your inventory like nobody's business since you don't have storage. Yeah, you're just a nightmare walking wardrobe of junk. But also it actually lets you craft gear, which is pretty useful. A lot of these variants take existing gear you can find and boost them into things that can hold their own until well near the end of the game. Mostly I was just destroying stuff so I didn't have to look at my inventory and scroll through it for like a minute. Other than that though, I was just chilling with my companion cube. Yeah, you actually get a companion cube, sort of floats beside you. You get it pretty early on, and you can outfit it with abilities like lighting up dark areas, a regeneration effect, a black light for secrets. I don't want to know the other kind of secrets it'll pick up, and dramatic music. One of its abilities is literally it'll just play dramatic music as you wander along. Also fast travel back to a breach you've activated, but mostly I spent the entire game with it playing music. And I'm not gonna lie, there was an odd parallel between the gameplay and the narrative elements here because things just sort of fell apart near the end. That's less an indictment of the game and more, some of the enemies in Hellpoint really don't like co-op. Like, the AI for the penultimate boss outright shattered during the encounter, turning into a derpy carousel with a kick me sign attached to it. Something which had similarly occurred with a few monsters here and there who spontaneously spin in place trying to figure out what they wanted to do. It was, well, janky. But then, I'd seen hints of the jank throughout the game. After all, while I enjoyed the overall aesthetic of Hellpoint, I had seen things, man. My buddy Alzarath turning invisible on my screen, reduced to a floating aura of solid space. Demonic hands protruding from the wall as they waited to crawl out from the vents and ambush me. Entire portions of the world fading out into existence, bleeding to a bizarre void, while I was doing my best to not friggin' die because this was happening during combat. And reminder, I don't tend to use a shield, so this was harrowing when I wasn't actually sure where the floor was anymore. Really, it made for a frustrating experience. There was also the thing with the impassable glowing orange wall after the Fat Jester boss, which I still don't know what was up with that. Still, by the same token, as much as I struggled with the visuals and all of that, I adored the sound design. There is a reason I had that cube constantly playing music while I was wandering around. Hellpoint just sounds good. You can legitimately make use of the audio to get hints at the location of a nearby monster. Quality soundtrack, and even if it's a made-up language, I enjoyed the voice acting. But yeah, that brings us to the conclusion, and I'm going to do my best to sum things up as such. Hellpoint is a fun but flawed experience, to the point that I think I really would have struggled with it more if I'd remained playing solo the entire while. Elements like puttering around with the black hole doors and waiting on horde locations to spawn were exhausting in a very unpleasant way. Acts of controlled helplessness that bothered me because I was frequently left wondering if there was important content locked behind something that was so inaccessible. And fast traveling between the various locations wasn't really a simple solution for the most part either, given that while you do have the ability to warp between dimensional breaches, it's generally only after you've spent a limited item to link them together. And you can in fact go ages between having the ability to return the way you came, which can feel punishing and isolating. And maybe that's why I had so much fun after I pulled a friend into the mix. It helped to make lengthy bits of backtracking or the waiting a lot more bearable. Plus, I now had someone to subject to all the effigy-induced stupidity when we're breaking the bounds of the games with platforming, though Alzrath is a questionable tour guide, given he'd alternate between showcasing neat locations and intentionally leading me into ambushes. And again, as much as I enjoyed Hellpoint's lore, I really wish things hadn't ended on such a lackluster note narratively. Ultimately, I recognize I have a lot of conflicting feelings about Hellpoint, and between that and the clunkiness, I found myself rating Hellpoint a fumble. It is definitely a mixed bag, but if you can find a friend to play this with, I would legitimately say it'd be worthwhile to take a trip down to Irith Novo. It is a lot of silly fun then, if you can bear with the flaws. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. I'd like to make a large thank you to Alzarath for joining me in my deep space adventure. There's a link to his channel in the description. Also, if you agree, disagree, or have something to say to him or me, feel free to comment. And if you have an interest in supporting my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's new release. There's also the Discord, links in the description, so you're part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. That said, I'll catch you in the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.